every time we come profoundly. So here we via, I guess, South Africa, Durban, via Houston, Texas. And we've got Radhika Nagar, Spain versus, via Scotland, via Mayapur, and all places in between. International personality, especially Govardhan. We've spent a lot of time together in Govardhan. And I'm here coming from Govardhan recently in Delhi. And we're here together in order to hear the Srimad-Bhagavatam together. Lucky us to be able to associate with Srila Prabhupada directly. As Srila Prabhupada said, if you want to know me, read my books. And when he was asked what happens when you die, he said, I'm not going to die. I will live forever in my books. So we're here to complete this vow for the rest of my life at least, and I hope others will take it up for the rest of their lives, to read the Srimad-Bhagavatam out loud like this with others every day, without fail. Okay, welcome aboard everyone out there in cyberspace. We hope you're having a lovely holiday season. Hare Krishna. So let's first read Srila Sanatana Goswami's glorification of the Srimad-Bhagavatam. Sanatana Goswami, as I've many times repeated, but here I'm in a new place, so I'm going to say it again. He was the senior disciple of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu spent more time instructing him directly than anyone else on the planet, and instructed him to write transcendental literatures. And he, especially Sanatana Goswami, is called the Siddhanta Acharya, because he was responsible for giving the whole philosophy from beginning to end, which he did in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita. And then he wrote Sri Krishna Lila Stava, which was his obeisances to the Vrindavan Lila of Krishna. And his idea was to offer 108 obeisances to Krishna's Vrindavan Lila. And this, what we're reading here, is the 107th obeisance, which is the 412th through the 416th verses of the Sri Krishna Lila Stava. And it goes like this. Sarva Shastrabdi Piyusha Sarva Vedaika Satpala Sarva Siddhanta Ratnadya Sarvalokaika Drikprada. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana Srimad Bhagavata Prabho Kalidwando Ditya Sri Krishna Parivartita. O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Sri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya Prema Varshakshadayate Sarvadasa Vasevyaya Sri Krishnaya Namostume. I bow down to you who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. I'll repeat that. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema, which means, of course, that you shouldn't skip any syllable. You can always be served by everyone. You are Sri Krishna himself. Madeka Bando Matsangin Madguro Mad Mahadana Mannishtadaga Mad Bhagya Mad Ananda Namostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu saduta dayin atini chochata kara hanamuncha gadachin mam premnarit kantayospuda. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So here we are, third canto, 26th chapter, the fundamental principles of the fundamental principles of material nature. And this follows chapter 25, the glories of devotional service. Lord Kapila Dev is speaking in response to the questions of his mother, Devahuti. And he began by explaining the glories of devotional service, which is very interesting because he came to give Sankhya philosophy. So to make sure that everyone understands that this Sankhya philosophy isn't about the atheistic Sankhya philosophy that is taught by the impostor Kapila Dev, much later on. He starts by explaining the glories of devotional service, which is the goal of Sankhya philosophy. And at the end of this teaching, he will also repeat it, the glories of devotional service. So, we're in the fundamental principles of material nature, beginning with text 3. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Supreme Soul. He has no beginning. He is transcendental to the material modes of nature and beyond the existence of this material world. He is perceivable everywhere because he is self-effulgent. And by his self-effulgent luster, the entire creation is maintained. Purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is described as being without beginning. He is Purusha, the Supreme Spirit. Purusha means person. When we think of a person in our present experience, that person has a beginning. This means that he has taken birth and that there is a history from the beginning of his life. But the Lord is particularly mentioned here as Anadi, beginningless. If we examine all persons, we will find that everyone has a beginning. But when we approach a person who has no beginning, he is the Supreme Person. That is the definition given in the Brahma Samhita. Ishvara Parama Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is Krishna, the Supreme Controller. He is without beginning, and he is the beginning of everyone. This definition is found in all Vedic literatures. The Lord is described as the soul or spirit. What is the definition of spirit? Spirit is perceivable everywhere. Brahman means great. His greatness is perceived everywhere. And what is that greatness? Consciousness. We have personal experience of consciousness, for it is spread all over the body. In every hair follicle of our body, we can feel consciousness. This is individual consciousness. Similarly, there is superconsciousness. The example can be given of a small light and the sunlight. The sunlight is perceived everywhere, even within the room or in the sky. But the small light is experienced within a specific limit. Similarly, our consciousness is perceived within the limit of our particular body. But the superconsciousness, or the existence of God, is perceived everywhere. He is present everywhere by his energy. It is stated in the Vishnu Purana that whatever we find, anywhere and everywhere, is the distribution of the energy of the Supreme Lord. In Bhagavad Gita also, it is confirmed that the Lord is all-pervading and exists everywhere by his two kinds of energy, one spiritual and the other material. Both the spiritual and material energies are spread everywhere, and that is the proof of the existence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The existence of consciousness everywhere is not temporary. It is without beginning, and because it is without beginning, it is also without end. The theory that consciousness develops at a certain stage of material combination is not accepted herein, for the consciousness which exists everywhere is said to be without beginning. The materialistic or atheistic theory stating that there is no soul, that there is no God, and that consciousness is the result of a combination of matter is not acceptable. Matter is not beginningless, it has a beginning. As this material body has a beginning, the universal body does also. And as our material body has begun on the basis of our soul, the entire gigantic universal body has begun on the basis of the Supreme Soul. The Vedanta Sutra says, Janmad Yasya, this entire material existence, this entire material exhibition, its creation, its growth, its maintenance, and its dissolution is an emanation from the Supreme Person. In Bhagavad Gita also the Lord says, I am the beginning, the source of birth of everything. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is described here. He is not a temporary person, nor does he have a beginning. He is without a cause, and he is the cause of all causes. Parat means transcendental, beyond the creative energy. The Lord is the creator of the creative energy. We can see that there is a creative energy in the material world, but he is not under this energy. He is Prakriti Parat, beyond this energy. He is not subjected to the threefold miseries created by the material energy because he is beyond it. The modes of material nature do not touch him. It is explained here, Syamam Jyoti, Swayam Jyoti. He is light himself. We have experience in the material world of one light's being a reflection of another, just as moonlight is a reflection of the sunlight. Sunlight is also the reflection of the Brahmajyoti. Similarly, Brahmajyoti, the spiritual effulgence, is a reflection of the body of the Supreme Lord. This is confirmed in the Brahma Samhita. Yasya Prabha Prabhavatak. The Brahmajyoti, or Brahman effulgence, is due to his bodily luster. Therefore it is said here, Swayam Jyoti. He himself is light. His light is distributed in different ways, as the Brahmajyoti, as sunlight, and as the moonlight. Bhagavad Gita confirms that in the spiritual world there is no need of sunlight, moonlight, or electricity. The Upanishads also confirm this, because the bodily luster of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is sufficient to illuminate the spiritual world. There is no need of sunlight, moonlight, or any other light or electricity. This self-illumination also contradicts the theory that the spirit soul or the spiritual consciousness develops at a certain point in material combination. The term Swayam Jyoti indicates that there is no tinge of anything material or any material reaction. It is confirmed here that the concept of the Lord's all-pervasiveness is due to His illumination everywhere. We have experience that the sun is situated in one place, but the sunlight is diffused all around for millions and millions of miles. That is our practical experience. Similarly, although the Supreme Light is situated in His personal abode, Vaikuntha or Vrindavan, His light is diffused not only in the spiritual world, but beyond that. In the material world also, that light is reflected by the sun globe, and the sunlight is reflected by the moon globe. Thus, although He is situated in His own abode, His light is distributed all over the spiritual and material worlds. The Brahma Samhita 537 confirms this. Goloka eva nivasatya kilatma bhuta. He is living in Goloka, but still He is present all over the creation. He is the super soul of everything, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and He has innumerable transcendental qualities. It is also concluded that although He is undoubtedly a person, He is not a Purusha of this material world. Mayavadi philosophers cannot understand that beyond this material world there can be a person. Therefore they are impersonalists. But it is explained very nicely here that the personality of Godhead is beyond material existence. Text 4. As His pastime, that Supreme Personality of Godhead, the greatest of the great, accepted the subtle material energy, which is invested with three material modes of nature, and which is related with Vishnu. Purport. In this verse, the word Gunamayim is very significant. Daivim means the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Gunamayim means invested with the three modes of material nature. When the material energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead appears, this Gunamayim energy acts as a manifestation of the energies of the three modes. It acts as a covering. The energy emanated from the Supreme Personality of Godhead manifests in two ways: as an emanation from the Supreme Lord and as a covering of the Lord's face. In Bhagavad Gita it is said that because the whole world is illusioned by the three modes of material nature, the common conditioned soul, being covered by such energy, cannot see the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The example of a cloud is very nicely given. All of a sudden, there may appear a big cloud in the sky. This cloud is perceived in two ways. To the sun, the cloud is a creation of its energy, but to the ordinary common man, in the conditioned state, it is a covering to the eyes. Because of the cloud, the sun cannot be seen. It is not that the sun is actually covered by the cloud. Only the vision of the ordinary being is covered. Similarly, although Maya cannot cover the Supreme Lord, who is beyond Maya, the material energy covers the ordinary living entities. Those conditioned souls who are covered are individual living entities, and he from whose energy Maya is created is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In another place, in Srimad-Bhagavatam, in the first canto, 7th chapter, it is said that Vyasadeva, by his spiritual vision, saw the Supreme Lord and the material energy standing behind him. This indicates that material energy cannot cover the Lord, just as darkness cannot cover the sun. Darkness cannot cover a jurisdiction which is very insignificant in comparison to that of the sun. Darkness can cover a jurisdiction, which is very insignificant in comparison to that of the sun. Darkness can cover a small cave, but not the open sky. This is very interesting. Let me read that part again. Darkness can cover a jurisdiction which is very insignificant in comparison to that of the sun. Darkness can cover a small cave, but not the open sky. Similarly, the covering capacity of the material energy is limited and cannot act on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is therefore called Vibhu. As the appearance of a cloud is accepted by the sun, so the appearance of the material energy at a certain interval is accepted by the Lord. Although his material energy is utilized to create the material world, this does not mean that he is covered by that energy. Those who are covered by the material energy are called conditioned souls. The Lord accepts the material energy for his material pastimes in creation, maintenance, and dissolution. But the conditioned soul is covered. He cannot understand that beyond this material energy there is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the cause of all causes. Just as a less intelligent person cannot understand that beyond the covering, the clouds, there's a bright sunshine. Did we do a hotspot from the regular? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Text 5. Divided into varieties by her threefold modes, material nature creates the forms of the living entities. And the living entities, seeing this, are illusioned by the knowledge covering feature of the illusory energy. Purport. Material energy has the power to cover knowledge, but this covering cannot be applied to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is applicable only to the prajaha, or to those who are born with material bodies, the conditioned souls. The different kinds of living entities vary according to the modes of material nature, as explained in Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literature. In Bhagavad Gita, it is very nicely explained that although the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance are born of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is not subject to them. In other words, the energy emanating from the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot act on him. It acts on the conditioned souls, who are covered by the material energy. The Lord is the Father of all living entities because he impregnates material energy with the conditioned souls. Therefore, the conditioned souls get bodies created by the material energy, whereas the Father of the living entities is aloof from the material modes, from the three modes. It is stated in the previous verse that the material energy was accepted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead in order that he might exhibit pastimes for the living entities who wanted to enjoy and lord it over the material energy. This world was created through the material energy. This world was created through the material energy of the Lord for the so-called enjoyment of such living entities. Why this material world was created for the suffering of conditioned souls is a very intricate question. There is a hint in the previous verse in the word lilaya, which means for the pastimes of the Lord. The Lord wants to rectify the enjoying temperament of the conditioned souls. It is stated in Bhagavad Gita that no one is the enjoyer but the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This material energy is created, therefore, for anyone who pretends to enjoy. An example can be cited here that there is no necessity for the government's creation of a separate police department, but because it is a fact that some of the citizens will not accept the state laws, a department to deal with criminals is necessary. There is no necessity, but at the same time, there is necessity. Similarly, there was no necessity to create this material world for the sufferings of the conditioned souls, but at the same time, there are certain living entities known as Nityabada, who are eternally conditioned. We say that they have been conditioned from time immemorial because no one can trace out when the living entity, the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, became rebellious against the supremacy of the Lord. It is a fact that there are two classes of men: those who are obedient to the laws of the Supreme Lord, and those who are atheists or agnostics, who do not accept the existence of God and who want to create their own laws. They want to establish that everyone can create his own laws or his own religious path without tracing out the beginning of the existence of these two classes. We can take it for granted that some of the living entities revolted against the laws of the Lord. Such entities are called conditioned souls, for they are conditioned by the three modes of material nature. Therefore the words Gunaya Vichitra are used here. In the material world, there are 8,400,000 species of life. As spirit souls, they are all transcendental to this material world. Why then do they exhibit themselves in different stages of life? The answer is given here. They are under the spell of the three modes of material nature. Because they were created by the material energy, their bodies are made of the material elements. Covered by the material body, the spiritual identity is lost, and therefore the word mumuhe is used here, indicating that they have forgotten their own spiritual identity. This forgetfulness of spiritual identity is present in the jivas, or souls, who are conditioned, being subject to be covered by the energy of the material nature. Jnana guhaya is another word used. Guha means covering, because the knowledge of the minute conditioned souls is covered. They are exhibited in so many species of life. It is said in the Srimad-Bhagavatam, 7th chapter, 1st canto, the living entities are illusioned by the material energy. In the Vedas also, it is stated that the eternal living entities are covered by different modes, and that they are called tricolored, red, white, and blue living entities. Red is the representation of the mode of passion, white is the representation of the mode of goodness, and blue is the representation of the mode of ignorance. These modes of material nature belong to the material energy, and therefore the living entities under these different modes of material nature have different kinds of material bodies. Because they are forgetful of their spiritual identities, they think the material bodies to be themselves. To the conditioned soul, me means the material body. This is called moha, or bewilderment. The British flag is red, white, blue. The American flag is red, white, blue. The French flag is red, white, blue. The Russian flag is red, white, blue. There's a lot of red, white, and blue going on here. It is repeatedly said in the Katha Upanishad that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is never affected by the influence of material nature. It is rather the conditioned souls, or the minute, infinitesimal parts and parcels of the Supreme, who are affected by the influence of material nature, and who appear in different bodies under the material modes. Text 6. Because of his forgetfulness, the transcendental living entity accepts the influence of material energy as his field of activities, and thus actuated, he wrongly applies the activities to himself. Purport. We've already heard the example given by the Lord that a person may see in his dream his own head cut off. Because of his forgetfulness, the transcendental living entity accepts the influence of material energy as his field of activities, and thus actuated, he wrongly applies the activities to himself. So that's what happens in a dream. You can see your own head being cut off, and you mistakenly become terrified, even though there shouldn't be any reason to be terrified, because if your head's cut off, you're finished, but you're still there and you're watching it. That's because you're identifying wrongly. Purport. So the material world is just like that. The forgetful living entity can be compared to a man who is under the influence of disease and has become mad, or to a man haunted by ghosts who acts without control and yet thinks himself to be in control. Under the influence of material nature, the conditioned soul becomes absorbed in material consciousness. In this consciousness, whatever is done under the influence of the material energy is accepted by the conditioned soul as self-actuated. Actually, the soul in his pure state of existence should be in Krishna consciousness. When a person is not acting in Krishna consciousness, he's understood to be acting in material consciousness. Consciousness cannot be killed, for the symptom of a living entity is consciousness. The material consciousness simply has to be purified. One becomes liberated by accepting Krishna or the Supreme Lord as master, and by changing the mode of consciousness from material consciousness to Krishna consciousness. Text 7. Material consciousness is the cause of one's conditional life, in which conditions are enforced upon the living entity by the material energy. Although the spirit soul does not do anything and is transcendental to such activities, he is thus affected by conditioned life. Purport. The Mayavadi philosopher, who does not differentiate between the Supreme Spirit and the individual spirit, says that the conditional existence of the living entity is his lila, or pastime. But the word pastime implies employment in the activities of the Lord. The Mayavadis misuse the word and say that even if the living entity has become a stool-eating hog, he is also enjoying his pastimes. This is the most dangerous interpretation. Actually, the Supreme Lord is the leader and maintainer of all living entities. His pastimes are transcendental to any material activity. Such pastimes of the Lord cannot be dragged to the level of the conditional activities of the living entities. In conditional life, the living entity actually remains as if a captive in the hands of material energy. Whatever the material energy dictates, the conditioned soul does. He has no responsibility. He is simply the witness of the action. But he is forced to act in that way due to his offense in his eternal relationship with Krishna. Lord Krishna therefore says in Bhagavad Gita that Maya, his material energy, is so forceful that it is insurmountable. But if a living entity simply understands that his constitutional position is to serve Krishna, and he tries to act on this principle, then however conditioned he may be, the influence of Maya immediately vanishes. This is clearly stated in Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter. Krishna takes charge of anyone who surrenders to him in helplessness, and thus the influence of Maya, or conditional life, is removed. The spirit soul is actually Satchidananda, eternal, full of bliss and full of knowledge. Under the clutches of Maya, however, he suffers from continued birth, death, old age, a disease and old age. One has to be serious to cure this condition of material existence and transfer himself to Krishna consciousness. For thus his long suffering may be mitigated without difficulty. In summary, the suffering of the conditioned soul is due to his attachment to material nature. This attachment should thus be transferred from matter to Krishna. Text 8. Because of the conditioned soul's material body and senses, and the senses presiding deities, the demigods, is the material nature. This is understood by learned men. The feeling of happiness and distress of the soul, who is transcendental by nature, are caused by the spirit soul himself. Purport. In the Bhagavad Gita it is said that when the Lord descends to this material world, he comes as a person by his own energy, Atma Maya. He is not forced by any superior energy. He comes by his own will, and this can be called his pastime, or lila. But here it is clearly stated that the conditioned soul is forced to take a certain type of body and senses under the modes of material nature. That body is not received according to his own choice. In other words, a conditioned soul has no free choice. He has to accept a certain type of body according to his karma. But when there are bodily relations as felt in happiness and distress, it is to be understood that the cause is the spirit soul himself. If he so desires, the spirit soul can change his conditional life of dualities by choosing to serve Krishna. The living entity is the cause of his own suffering, but he can also be the cause of his eternal happiness. When he wants to engage in Krishna consciousness, a suitable body is offered to him by the internal potency, the spiritual energy of the Lord, and when he wants to satisfy his senses, a material body is offered. Thus it is his free choice to accept a spiritual body or a material body. But once the body is accepted, he has to enjoy or suffer the consequences. The Mayavadi philosopher's presentation is that the living entity enjoys his pastimes by accepting the body of a hog. This theory is not acceptable, however, because the word pastime implies voluntary acceptance for enjoyment. Therefore, its interpretation is most misleading. When there is enforced acceptance for suffering, it is not a pastime. The Lord's pastimes and the conditioned living entity's acceptance of karmic reaction are not on the same level. Text 9. Devahuti said, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, kindly explain the characteristics of the Supreme Person and his energies. For both of these are the causes of this manifest and unmanifest creation. Purport. Prakriti or material nature is connected with both the Supreme Lord and the living entities, just as a woman is connected with her husband as wife and her children as a mother. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that He impregnates Mother Nature with children, living entities, and thereafter all species of life, of living entities, become manifest. The relationship of the living entities, the relationship of all living entities with material nature has been explained. Now, an understanding of the relationship between material nature and the Supreme Lord is sought by Devahuti. The product of that relationship is stated to be the manifest and unmanifest material world. The unmanifest material world is the subtle Mahatattva. And from that Mahatattva, the material manifestation has emerged. In the Vedic literatures, it is said that by the glance of the Supreme Lord, the total material energy is impregnated, and then everything is born of material nature. It is also confirmed in the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita that under His glance, Adhyakshena, under His direction, and by His will, nature is working. It is not that nature works blindly. After understanding the position of the conditioned souls in relation to material nature, Devahuti wanted to know how nature works under the direction of the Lord and what the relationship is between the material nature and the Lord. In other words, she wanted to learn the characteristics of the Supreme Lord in relation to the material nature. The relationship of the living entities with matter and that of the Supreme Lord with matter are certainly not on the same level, although the Mayavadis may interpret it in that way. When it is said that the living entities are bewildered, the Mayavadi philosophers ascribe this bewilderment to the Supreme Lord, but that is not applicable. The Lord is never bewildered. That is the difference between personalists and impersonalists. Devahuti is not unintelligent. I'll repeat that again. Devahuti is not unintelligent. She has enough intelligence to understand that living entities are not on the level of the Supreme Lord. Because the living entities are infinitesimal, they become bewildered or conditioned by material nature. But this does not mean that the Supreme Lord is also conditioned or bewildered. The difference between the conditioned soul and the Lord is that the Lord is the Lord, the master of material nature, and He is therefore not subject to its control. He is controlled neither by spiritual nature nor by material nature. He is the supreme controller Himself, and He cannot be compared to the living entities who are controlled by the laws of material nature. Two words used in this verse are Sat and Asat. The cosmic manifestation is Asat, it does not exist. But the material energy of the Supreme Lord is Sat, or ever existing. Material nature is ever existing in its subtle form as the energy of the Lord, but it sometimes manifests this non-existent or temporarily existent nature, the cosmos. An analogy may be made with the father and mother. The father and the mother exist, but sometimes the mother begets children. Similarly, this cosmic manifestation, which comes from the unmanifest material nature of the Supreme Lord, sometimes appears and again disappears. But the material nature is ever existing, and the Lord is the supreme cause for both the subtle and gross manifestations of this material world. Text 10. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, The unmanifested, eternal combination of the three modes is the cause of the manifest state and is called pradhan. It is called prakriti when in the manifested stage of existence. Purport. The Lord points out material nature in its subtle stage, which is called pradhan, and he analyzes this pradhan. The explanation of pradhan and prakriti is that pradhan is the subtle, undifferentiated sum total of all material elements. Although they are undifferentiated, one can understand that the total material elements are contained therein. When the total material elements are manifested by the interaction of the three modes of material nature, the manifestation is called prakriti. Impersonalists say that Brahman is without variegatedness and without differentiation. One may say that pradhan is the Brahman stage, but actually the Brahman stage is not pradhan. Pradhan is distinct from Brahman, because in Brahman there is no existence of the material modes of nature. One may argue that the Mahatattva is also different from pradhan, because in the Mahatattva there are manifestations. The actual explanation of pradhan, however, is given here. When the cause and effect are not clearly manifested, avyakta, the reaction of the total elements does not take place. And that stage of material nature is called pradhan. Pradhan is not the time element, because in the time element there are actions and reactions, creation and annihilation. Nor is it the jiva, or marginal potency of the living entities, or designated conditioned living entities, because the designations of the living entities are not eternal. One adjective used in this connection is nitya, which indicates eternality. Therefore, the condition of material nature immediately previous to its manifestation is called pradhan. Text 11. The aggregate elements, namely the 5 gross elements, the 5 subtle elements, the 4 internal senses, the 5 senses for gathering knowledge, and the 5 outward organs of action, are known as the pradhan. Purport. According to Bhagavad Gita, the sum total of the 24 elements described herein is called Yonir Mahad Brahma. The sum total of living entities is impregnated into this Yonir Mahad Brahma, and they are born in different forms, beginning from Brahma down to the insignificant ant. In the Srimad-Bhagavatam and other Vedic literatures, the sum total of the 24 elements, pradhan, is also described as Yonir Mahad Brahma. It is the source of the birth and sustenance of all living entities. Text 12. There are 5 gross elements, namely earth, water, fire, air, and ether. There are also 5 subtle elements: smell, taste, color, touch, and sound. Text 13. The senses for acquiring knowledge and the organs for action, number 10, namely the auditory sense, the sense of taste, the tactile sense, the sense of sight, the sense of smell, the active organ for speaking, the active organs for working, and those for traveling, generating, and evacuating. Text 14. The internal, subtle senses are experienced as having 4 aspects in the shape of mind, intelligence, ego, and contaminated consciousness. Distinctions between them can be made only by different functions, since they represent different characteristics. Purport. The four internal senses, or subtle senses, described herein, are defined by different characteristics. When pure consciousness is polluted by material contamination, and when identification with the body becomes prominent, one is said to be situated under false ego. Consciousness is the function of the soul, and therefore, behind consciousness, there is soul. Consciousness polluted by material contamination is called ahankara.
We're allowed to ask questions?
Well, we're just about ready to finish, I think. Just 1 second. Keep your thought. Text 15. All these are considered the qualified Brahman. The mixing element, which is known as time, is counted as the 25th element. Purport. According to the Vedic version, there is no existence beyond Brahman. Sarvam Kalidam Brahma. It is stated also in the Vishnu Purana that whatever we see is Parasya Brahmanak Shakti. Everything is an expansion of the energy of the Supreme Absolute Truth. Brahman. When Brahman is mixed with the three qualities, goodness, passion, and ignorance, there results in the material expansion, which is sometimes called saguna, which is sometimes called saguna Brahman, and which consists of these 25 elements. In the nirguna Brahman, where there is no material contamination, or in the spiritual world, the three modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance, are not present. Where nirguna Brahman is found, simple, unalloyed goodness prevails. Saguna Brahman is described by the Sankhya system of philosophy as consisting of 25 elements, including the time factor, past, present, and future. We'll stop there. Hare Krishna. It's deep and analytical and all of that, but when we learn the art of following it, and to do this, you have to hear it again and again for a long time to actually be able to follow it properly. But as you do come to that stage, in proportion to the degree of understanding and realization, to that extent, material nature backs off from us. That's the purpose of the Sankhya philosophy, to become disassociated of the influence of material nature. Okay, Hare Krishna, we'll stop there. We're going to have reflections, and Radhika Nagar's over there just like biting at the bit. He's used to being in Govardhan, where it's like you got to fight your way in to get a point in. There's so many devotees asking. Go ahead, Radhika. Here, this is your. Wait.
The fourth element of the subtle body. The internal subtle senses are experienced as having four aspects in the shape of mind, intelligence, ego, and contaminated consciousness. Distinctions between them can be made only by different functions, since they represent different characteristics. So this contaminated consciousness is not spoken about by Prabhupada a lot. I don't think anywhere else than here. What does it mean and what is the function?
The consciousness that is emanating from the soul is pure. It's like rainwater that comes from the sky. It comes distilled and it's pure. And then when it touches the earth, then it becomes contaminated. So when the uncontaminated soul coming out of the body of Mahavishnu touches the Pradhan, then it becomes contaminated. And that is the instant in which false ego was created. So when the consciousness touches the false ego, and you notice that there's 3 stages, there's mind, intelligence, what is it? Ego and contaminated consciousness. So this ego is the false ego. Mm-hmm. The real ego is the soul, the consciousness coming from the soul. And when that real ego touches the false ego, it becomes contaminated consciousness, which then progressively develops into all the other parts of the body and mind.
They seem to have to overlap a little bit.
They do overlap.
Yeah.
They have to overlap because one's coming in contact, and that's the point at which they come in contact. That's why contaminated consciousness, that's why Prabhupada translates it like that. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting because one reflection that I would give is, when Prabhupada talks about the soul being the cause of his own suffering, and that's in the Gita also. It's not just Prabhupada, it's in the Gita. It says the material nature is the cause of the, problems of material existence, the contamination, and then the soul is responsible for the sufferings and happiness, because it's without the soul, those experiences don't turn into happiness or distress. They're only observed by the soul, by the consciousness. Anything else? That's okay? Yes, Radha Raman, here. You have to come get the thing.
Maharaj, I've got a question, and also Mother Rati Manjari has a question as well.
Who's coming first? Go ahead. Sorry.
And Downatai Prabhu is offering his obeisances as well.
My obeisances to you, Downatai Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Welcome aboard.
And my question is, was actually a question about something you said after the reading, Maharaj. We were saying that if we actually take the time and trouble to follow these descriptions and repeatedly hear these descriptions, it will detach us from material nature. And I'm just wondering what the nature of that repeatedly hearing is. Should it be every time we read the Bhagavatam, or should we actually focus on these sections separate from our incidental reading?
Well, you find in Prabhupada's books that these teachings are throughout his purports. They are sometimes paraphrased differently, but the same principles are given again and again. So it's both. But the point I'm making is that, just like it's the subject matter in this question, or the answer to this question, is the assimilation of knowledge. Because the assimilation of spiritual knowledge is like the assimilation of any other knowledge in one sense. In other sense, it's different, because it actually frees you from the influence of material nature. But the actual principle of assimilating knowledge is the same. In learning any subject matter, any occupation or anything, how to do anything, it takes time. It's like a kid. The kid has to walk, but first of all he has to fall on his nose a few times, and get up, and then fall on his nose a few times, and then get up. But because the ability to walk is inherent in the body, eventually by practice it learns. I mean, that's a gross example, because all he's doing is just some physical thing. He's not analyzing and trying to understand and trying to change his behavior accordingly. That's a higher realm of assimilation of knowledge. But the principle of learning something gradually by practice and by making mistakes and learning how to apply the knowledge is the same. And because it is subtle, and because it is not easy to even just understand what to speak of, act accordingly. The process is, as we actually assimilate the knowledge, then we look out at the world through that knowledge, and eventually it makes sense to us. We see through that knowledge. When we begin to see the modes of nature and how they're working and how we interact with them and the modes of nature that we're in as we go along, to that extent we get to observe. To that extent we learn that we're the observer. We're not actually the senses, we're not actually the mind, we're not actually the senses and the objects of the senses. We're observing those things, but we're not actually those things. Prabhupada always used to give the example, in every language of the world, the personal pronoun, possessive pronoun is there. My body, this is my box of Kleenex. This is my microphone. The microphone's over here and I'm over here. So there's a difference between the microphone and me. Therefore I can say my microphone. I never say I microphone. And everyone says it all over the world. Even when we were growing up as little kids, we always say this is mine. No, it's my toy. Not yours, it's mine. Give it back. So when we learn to see, no, this is not microphone. This is Krishna's microphone. I had nothing to do with the manufacture of this microphone. I had nothing to do with the manufacturing of my body. The mothers know it, but us men can't know it. But the woman can know as the body of the child develops in the body, and all of a sudden she gets a kick. Ouch, ouch, The difference between that body and her. Yes? This is Matt. He needs to get the...
Oh, yeah. Well, just on the point on I'm not the body, like children up until the age of 5, before their conscious minds develop, they oftentimes refer to themselves in the third person. So until their consciousness attaches itself to the material body, and they assume that identity, they will, like my nephew would, up until the age of 5, excuse me, would say, this is Isaac's whatever. It was all third person because they haven't associated.
Because what you just expressed was one of the stages of development of consciousness, because the first consciousness is anamoya, and anything that you see means, anamoya means food. Babies, everything, get something, immediately put it in their mouth. And at that stage, they can't distinguish as them from someone else, difference. But the pranamaya means they realize, oh, I'm over here, and there's another person over there, and I don't have to eat that person. Although in the very beginning, they'll take the mother's finger and put it in their mouth and chomp on it, So yeah, there is a stage of development of consciousness in which, the soul starts to recognize that he's different from other living beings with consciousness, pranamaya. And the Jnanamaya stage means they start to figure out what to do about it, and the Anandamaya stage is when they actually enjoy. Yes, Pundarik, Dr. G.
Hare Krishna. Back to ego, and under psychology, as I remember learning it, we're meant to develop our ego around about 7 or 8 years of age. And of course we call that false ego. because real ego is our Krishna consciousness. But I can clearly see even 1-year-olds consciously taking information and making decisions and acting according to those decisions, which the traditional sort of concept of it doesn't explain that. It doesn't work at all. But if you can expand on that, then please do. My main question and realization is the scientific concept of evolution, and that we spontaneously developed, the DNA decided, oh, I want legs, so it changed and we grew legs. But I've never heard an explanation of how simultaneously the male and female of each species managed to evolve. Has anyone explained how is it possible that the male and the female of so many species evolve just conveniently in order to procreate and develop?
Well, of course, it can't be explained that way. It can't be explained that way because the basic defect of empiric science is that everything can be experienced, it can be explained by the pragmatic empiric method, by the reductionist method of reducing everything down to chemicals and chance combination of those elements. There is the problem is that they refuse to identify consciousness as a separate energy, as a separate category of energy. And as long as they haven't, when they're examining what they're trying to examine, they cannot involve themselves. But they're involved. And until they accept that consciousness is a separate category of energy from matter, they will not be able to. Now it's evolved into quantum mechanics, and the quantum mechanic principle is they're trying to include the consciousness of the observer into the event, but they can't do it. It's called the unified field theory, UFT. And there's another grand something. There's another 3-letter acronym for the same thing. How one thing that'll explain everything.
Grand unifying theory.
Gut. That's right. I should have remembered that gut. It's their gut feeling, the grand unifying theory. Unconsciously, they're actually kind of touching it because that gut feeling comes from, something other than the gut, So that's the essence of the problem when it comes to trying to explain what's going on here. Unless there is an actual acknowledgement that the consciousness is actually a separate category of energy, it cannot be explained. Therefore, it's called the mind-body problem, or the mystery of consciousness. And they still, even the biggest physicists and chemists and mathematicians, they cannot come to an agreement about this because they can't accept that there's an energy that they can't cut into two and put in their, test tubes and nitrate it and dissolve it with acid and see how it reacts, and then and all that time they're the persons that are doing all those things, and they can't conceive that there's a consciousness that's doing it in the first place, and that's how come it's there. It's so logical. It's for them. It seems silly. It seems this is just childish explanation. We have to figure it out. We can figure it out, then it'll be real. But Any other explanation coming from scripture is just childish. But this section is the section that actually explains all that. It really does. But it's not easy. It's not easy to even follow it all along. What to speak of follow it and actually be able to put it all together. Remember that it's actually described. Prabhupada describes it in his purports that when you actually learn this philosophy and can explain it to another person, with enough detail as they can understand, then the material this is the way of becoming free from the influence of the material nature. And most devotees give up before they get to that point. That's why people stop reading Prabhupada's books. No offense to anyone in the universe intended. But if you stop reading Prabhupada's purports, not only because you can't understand it, but because if you stop, time will cause you to forget. That's it. It's as simple as that. If you don't continue to hear these basics, and therefore, what's the last instruction of Shukadeva Goswami? Here we are in the 3rd canto, and all the way to the 12th canto, the last instruction of Shukadeva Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit, after Krishna's pastimes, after all the incarnations, after all the philosophy, after the Uddhava Gita, everything. And what's the last instruction? Somebody remember? Give up the animalistic tendency to think that you are the body. That's the last instruction. Of course, it's not the last instruction. There's, but it's symbolic of how important it is and how difficult it is to realize that we're not the body. Yes, Jiva Moya has a question. Just a second. I mean, Jiva Maya, excuse me. Moya's my in Bengali contamination.
Hare Krishna. What you just said, Maharaj, about being able to explain the understanding of the material nature to somebody else, and that being able to free you from the grips of it. Can you talk a bit more about that and whether that applies to all aspects of the philosophy or just specifically the workings, and also if people aren't maybe academically inclined, or
That's our challenge. The challenge is to express it in a way that you can explain it to somebody that's not academically inclined in a way that they can understand it. Anybody. You mean to say that you can't understand that you're not the body if you're not academically inclined?
No.
Then
Anyone can understand that, but the intricate
it's just like when you learn mathematics, the first thing you have to learn is 1 + 1 = 2. And all of the multiplication and division and addition and subtraction tables. You have to learn them down cold. Otherwise you can't go to arithmetic. And unless you go to arithmetic, you can't go to algebra. If you don't go through algebra, you can't learn geometry. If you can't learn geometry, you can't go to trigonomics. And I tell you what, high school takes us through all that. If you're a high school educated person, then you've learned those things anywhere in the world. So, yeah, geometry is a little intricate. Calculus is a little intricate. Maybe everyone doesn't get to calculus, but they get to geometry, at least algebra and geometry. That's everyone. Everyone that's educated in the West, especially, or even especially India. I mean, school system in India is more competitive than it is in the West. That's why always in in the spelling bees and the science bees and the math bees. You know, the Indians and the Chinese and the South Koreans, they run circles around the Westerners. But it's the same process. It just means, so if you want me to talk about it, it means you got to stick with it. You have to keep trying, and you will understand. You have the capacity to understand, and you can understand it and explain it. It may not be in the same philosophical terms, or you may need to use simple examples, but it's all there in Prabhupada's purport. So you have to continue to inquire. The key is to not let something go by that you don't understand. The key to assimilating knowledge is not to let something go in that you don't understand. If you don't understand it, then you have to inquire. And if you still don't understand it, you have to inquire again. And if you still don't understand it, you have to inquire again until you do understand it. I mean, it is a fact in the regular school system they have special classes. Some of those special classes are the ones that are for gifted and get bored, and they'll stop learning just because everything's too easy for them. And the others are a little bit slower, so they have special classes, but they have special classes for both sides. So hey, Devahuti, she's the one who answered the question. She's not a philosopher. Of course, she's a princess, and she's son of Swayambhu Vamana, so I guess you probably get something on you, something, But every human being has this capacity. Maybe not to understand it and be able to explain it analytically in a higher class or anything, but we can understand what's going on by hearing these verses and by hearing the purports and by inquiring and then by hearing it again and again and again. But that requires determination. The problem is not your lack of ability to understand it. The quality is the stick-to-itiveness, the determination, the commitment, the understanding. Yeah, I have to know this. I have to find this out. I have to get to know this well enough. And not just so that you can explain it to someone else, so you can explain it to your own mind. Because my God, our minds, what are our minds doing every day, every moment to moment? It's what does Arjun say to Krishna? Chanchalak himanak Krishna, prabhati balabhadridam, tasyaham manyate. This mind is too difficult. I can't do this. It's like trying to catch the wind. I can't do this. And Krishna says, yeah, you're right. He says, actually, dur nigraham chalam. His answer, he says, nigraham chalam, difficult. Nigraham chalam means flickering and difficult. And dur nigraham means more difficult. So Krishna in his answer says, yes, you're right. Actually, it's more difficult than you think. But then he said, it's possible. How? By practice. You have to keep practicing. You can't stop practicing. Even to the time your last breath. But if Prabhupada promised us, even if you can't get it in that way, all the philosophy and the intricacies and all that, if you keep trying and don't stop trying, then Krishna will come at the end, forces you into your heart. Is that okay? That's something? No. Rati Manjari's got a question.
So various other devotees are greeting you. Brian Phillips welcomes you back to the UK and sorry we couldn't arrange better weather for you. And Rati Manjari's question is, Dear Maharaj, please accept my respectful obeisances. Great to see you again on yet another continent. I have a question. In the purport to text 7, it says, whatever the material dictates, the conditioned soul does. He has no responsibility, he is simply the witness of the action, but he is forced to act in that way due to his offense in his eternal relationship with Krishna. I understand that we are forced to act by the modes of nature, but I was of the understanding that we do have responsibility for our actions
Keep reading the purport. Read the rest of the purport, Prati.
and are held accountable for them.
Read the rest of the purport. At the end of the purport it says, but we do have the choice to serve Krishna or not. Yeah, you have to continue to read the purport, because in the last part of the purport, Prabhupada says that the soul has the ability to choose, even from that situation. See, when we get this material body, there's something called prarabdha karma, and prarabdha karma is the mature effect of our previous activities on this in this body, and it's like built in, right? So from things that happened to us before, we have a certain amount of happiness and a certain amount of distress that you cannot change. But within that context, you can meet something different. You can hear the Hare Krishna mantra walking down the street, or you can go to a feast and take a gulab jamun, or you can, hear a podcast, or nowadays you can see a blog or a vlog or a video of somebody speaking Krishna consciousness, and that way you contact Krishna, or you contact Krishna consciousness. And in the beginning you contact it, and it just you're not aware of what's happening. It's called agyata. Means without, gyata means knowledge. But it's, you get sukriti, you get some piety, you get some little extra bank account, a little something put in your bank account. Not very much, so you won't think about getting interest in it or anything. It just comes in somehow or other, a penny or two here or there. But after a long enough time, when you get enough agyata sukriti in your bank account, then you get the ability to choose. And then you choose to go see what's going on, rather than just, have the kirtan walk by and say, that was far out, and then just walk on and keep doing your business. At some point you hear the kirtan and say, well, I'm going to find out more about that, and you follow them, or you find out where they are and go to the temple, and that's a result of agyata sukriti. So both, in other words, in simple terms, both free will and what's the other word? Both free will and determinism. No, what's the word? There's a word for it.
Desire?
No. Yeah, predestination. That's what I'm thinking, predestination. So both predestination and free will are true at the same time. But our tendency, having been educated in the modern system of education, is to think that it has to be one or the other. But it's both at the same time. You can't choose nahi kaschit janamapi jatutis jati karma krit karya de yavashak karma sarva prakriti jargunai nahi kaschit janamapi jatutis jati karma krit means everyone is forced to act according to the nature they have acquired by the three modes of nature. No one can refrain from doing something, even for a moment. Tattvavitu mahabaho, guna karmi bhagyo, but tattvavut, that one who actually hears from outside that system of precondition knowledge that comes outside of the system of action and reaction in the material nature, tattvavitu mahabaho, that person learns to tell the difference between devotional service and fruitive activity and chooses devotional service. So the verses there, 327 and 328, if you learn these two verses, then it'll help you to discriminate. Hari Krishna Dasi has got something to say, and I'm sure it's going to be good.
Thank you. Maharaj, we are so grateful to be here. And it is good. Thank you for coming to this continent, despite the weather. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you for explaining. Down here? Okay. Thank you very much for building on this understanding of free will and predestination. Does that come to also providence? What is the link between predestination and providence? And then
they are linked in the sense that when you have done enough, it's partly the same answer. What, providence. You've done something to deserve to be able to come in contact with the holy name. Like you've done something to be walking down the street and having the kirtan just go by.
This is a big question.
Yeah, this is the question. That you've done something, but when you chant Hare Krishna, that means you've done more. Like if you're going down the street, and some people will make fun of the devotees. Hey, Hare Krishna, or whatever. That they've got more pious critics than a person just walks by and goes, "Oh, that's weird," and then keeps on going by. And it's right there in the verses of the Bhagavatam. You can't understand this philosophy unless you have developed faith. And the degree to which that faith is developed is the degree with which you will be able to understand, accept, perceive for yourself the truth of these verses and how they fit together. It's not that you can figure it out with your own intelligence. Not possible. It requires help. It's avarohapanta and avarohapanta. One is the descending process and the other is the ascending process. By the ascending process, it's not possible. But through the descending process, it is possible. And that's the evidence that there must have been something more. But at the same time, there's causeless mercy. Prabhupada decided to come to the West, and if he hadn't decided to come to the West, so his will is there also. Whether you're deserving or not, that will of that liberated person to come to where you are, that. But it's not chance. It's not exactly accident. It's not chance. But our ability, because that dependence on the liberated soul to come to the West and liberate us all, without him making that decision, there would be no way that we could come in contact. But still, when we do come in contact, that first contact, some will respond more than others. All of us who distribute books, we know that. You can read something out of the book to someone to try to convince them to take the book, and one person will say, "Oh, that's just what I've been looking for my whole life. Give me that book. Here, take 100 quid." Of course, that would be nice. Everyone was doing that. It's on the marathon, so the devotees are smiling. So, but on the other hand, on the other person, you read the same thing, same person, that same level of intelligence, whatever, education. Hey, what is this? Sounds like this, I can't even understand. What is this saying? What language are you distributing? You know. So it's all mixed together. It's not all so black and white, so simple. We're trying to make it black and white. Again, it comes back to the same thing. We're trying to use our linear mode of seeing what is right or wrong, but lateral intelligence, lateral thinking, lateral intelligence allows us to accommodate the fact that two apparently contradictory things may be true at the same time. I'll give you a really good example that I wrote in my last offering. I don't know if you read it, but in the purport to Bhagavatam 7:5, 23 and 24, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, in the beginning of the section in which Srila Prabhupada elucidates on each item of devotional service, on the first line of the first paragraph, he says that the chanting of the holy names of the Lord is, at the beginning of devotional life, required, essential, most important. And then the first sentence of the next paragraph, he says, in the process of hearing the Srimad-Bhagavatam is considered to be the most important. Now, someone without faith, or without enough piety, or without enough spiritual intelligence, will question that and think that there is a contradiction, and therefore not being able to understand it. But the fact is that they are both just as important. They're both the most important. And therefore, if you give up one for the other, you won't be able to get the full thing. So providence, yes, there is providence in the body. And there's a certain amount of happiness and distress. Even devotees, you can see, even sometimes devotees, they just take it easily. They seem to advance nicely. They don't have so many big obstacles. Sometimes, if they're even better devotees, Krishna will take everything away from them so that they can actually fully surrender. So there's a dynamic at play. It's personal. Devotional life is personal. Yes, Radhika.
My Western mentality. That it's described that like Prabhupada said, I created your good fortune, and I think it's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He explains that the Madhyam Adhikari is the one that is kind of giving the opportunity to the soul to begin their Krishna consciousness by their mercy. But yet we find that some people will come in touch with them, and some people will not come in touch with them, and that's Krishna is determined by Krishna. So at the end, even though it is, the question is, even though we are hearing that is the Madhyam Adhikari, the one that creates the good fortune of the fallen souls, but Krishna's intervention is there just as important, if not more important, because he will cause that person to cross.
No. Okay, you left it. Sorry, you left out a variable, and that is Krishna's will. Krishna's will. It's not two things. It's Krishna's will that does it, and it's the devotee's will that does it. It's the same, because Krishna, it says in the 11th canto, that is by my will I've decided to deliver the world by the lotus feet of my pure devotees, by the lotus dust of the lotus feet of my pure devotees.
So that person must have done something to get the mercy. It's not possible.
No. It's both. It's exactly what I'm trying to say. Radhika is saying therefore there must be causeless mercy. It's not causeless. It's both. Whoops. Sorry to our audience. I just tripped over. I just pulled the wire with my foot by mistake. Hare Krishna. Sorry for any inconvenience to your psychology as you just got thrown on the floor. Hare Krishna. It's both. You don't. If you insist on thinking that it has to be one or the other, then you won't get it. It can be both. It can one. It can be the other. It's not that Krishna is limited. Krishna can do anything.
Yeah.
But both are in play. Both can be in play. Or it can be the first time that the souls come in contact. And that's when the causeless mercy is prominent. The example is used, if Prabhupada hadn't come over here, what would we be able to know? Before Prabhupada came with his Gita, there were hundreds of Gitas translated into English. And in each one of the verses, in each one of the Gitas, it says, Krishna says, become my devotee. And not one person became a devotee of Krishna.
And just because I'm doing books now, I'm meeting all kinds of people, new people, and I just find it very interesting that when they show some interest, something, then they tell me, like, yesterday at the end of the day, I met this guy, 65-year-old guy, and I saw him working very well dressed, and I thought it will be wonderful if he takes the book, And then he stops, I presented, I said, okay. And he took a first canto of the Bhagavatam. And then he was holding the book, he said, actually I lived in Nepal for 4 years, So that he must have visited the temples, he must have done, something. And I was just thinking that, there is always some qualification, There seem to, not always anyway.
Well, there again, you can't make a rule out of all. You can't make a rule of everything. Like my experience in distributing books on the street is that when my consciousness was good, first of all, I would attract nice people. And if I was in Maya, I'd attract all kinds of weird people. And if my desire to give the book was really strong, then they'd take the book. And if their desire not to take the book was stronger than my desire to take the book, they wouldn't take the book, no matter what I said or did.
Yeah.
So therefore, both are there. There's Krishna inside the heart going, hey, remember that? And there's, and there's the conditioned soul that's just determined like a mule, and you're trying to make the mule come, and they're, no, I'm not going anywhere. No, absolutely not. No, forget it. No. So all of these things are, the combination of the soul's condition and the leveling of condition, and also the empowerment of the. You were saying how it's the Madhyamadikari that does this and that. Doesn't mean that the Uttamadikaris don't make or influence. I mean, Haridas Thakur was Maha Uttamadikari, and he was most of the time standing in one place and chanting Hare Krishna, although he did go out. With Nityananda, he would go out under the instruction of Lord Chaitanya and give people his association, and you can imagine. Lord Chaitanya would go out, and everybody who just looked at him, tears would come to their eyes, and they'd fall on the ground, roll on the ground, and they'd be full of Krishna prema. So that's a case where they're getting way beyond, in many cases, what they deserve or what their karma will allow them for anything. So it's a combination of all those things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the influence of modes of nature. They're always changing. Sometimes people feel in the mode of goodness. Sometimes they're in passion. Sometimes they're in ignorance. When they're in passion, they'll just run right by you, And, they're in ignorance because, their wife kicked them out of bed, or they got out of bed on the wrong side of sleep or whatever, and they just, they're going to bark at you no matter what you say. And there's other people who just got something just nice happen to them, and they're like floating, and you meet them and you just, oh yeah. So you've got the modes of nature. Therefore it's described that there's 5, yes, and those are always in play. Whatever we do, even in devotional service, there's always in play. And we don't take in consideration all of those, then we can't understand the full picture. And ultimately, it's the Supersoul. So at the end of the day, it's the Supersoul. He has to cooperate. But he cooperates when he sees the degree of your surrender, or the degree of your desire, or whatever that's happened to you that allows you to, take a step forward. Yeah, it is complex. It is not easy to understand because it can't be understood analytically by the reductionist way. Hare Krishna Dasi has something else to say.
Maharaj, you just mentioned the desire. Okay. Thank you. You just mentioned desire and the super soul being able to see our desire and how much we want to engage. And it's a very beautiful sentence here in the purport of 326.8 where Srila Prabhupada's writing that but when there are bodily reactions it's felt it's to be understood that the cause is, if he so desires, the spirit soul can change this conditional life of duality by choosing to serve Krishna. So I was wondering if you could expand on if he so desires. So how can the spirit soul change?
It means that the spirit soul's ability to change depends on the super soul. If the soul so desires, then the super soul will act. But the super soul will never interfere with the soul's desire. See, there's the soul's desire. Then there's the contaminated desires that are the material energy covering the conditioned soul. Then there's the super soul. Then there's the super soul. The original desire, is coming from the soul. The soul, the material elements are inert. It's like when a person's intoxicated, he may desire to run down the street naked with a lampshade on his head and think that everything's okay. Again, it comes back to the influence of the modes of material nature. So when a person, by trial and error, by living in the material world and trying all kinds of things, comes to the point of realizing it's all kind of, there must be something more than this, which all of us sitting in this room has come to, by the way, at some stage in our lives, otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here. Then our soul, our desire changes. We want to know. That's the beginning of human life. Atato Brahma Jigyasa. Inquisitiveness. That desire. Inquisitive means desire. Desire is the symptom of the soul. Every soul has desire. But depending on the mode of nature that it's covered by, that desire will push them to do one thing or another. The animals will eat, they'll sleep, they'll mate, and they'll defend themselves. That's the extent of their desires. They can't think of things more than that, deeper than that. And the human body, when we get the human body, then we have the capacity to think more than that. But still we have those other desires. So when we're just taking care of those other desires without inquiring about something more, then Krishna won't interfere. Otherwise love couldn't exist. Krishna won't interfere with the desire of the soul. So it's a combination of all those things. It's not simple black and white, wrong or right, this or that answer. The answer is complex. The answer is, but it's not complex in a sense that you can't understand it. You can understand it. It just has to be explained to you. And it has to be explained to you enough times from enough angles of vision. And that's what Prabhupada's purports are there for. That he explains these things in so many different ways, from so many different angles, in so many different pastimes, so that eventually we get it. And when Krishna sees that, to the extent, to the proportion that Krishna sees that, Yayatam mam prapadyante tangstataiva bhajamyaham manusham parthasarvasha. As they surrender to me, or as they approach me, I will reward them accordingly. Everyone is following my path without exception. Everyone. Every living being, even the animals, everyone is following Krishna's path, because he created the whole thing. That's why this Sankhya philosophy is important, to be able to see, to be able to get the eyes to see how everything ultimately depends on Krishna's creation, the material world. Everything that we have is given to us. Isn't it? Or not? Isn't it? Or not? We didn't create any of this energy. We didn't decide what body we got. It's all given to us by the material nature. Just like the woman's body, it has the potency, the capability of creating the body, but without the man, without the seed, without the soul, it can't do it. And that's the whole point of this Sankhya philosophy that we're just beginning to get into now. This is the 26th chapter, fundamentals of material nature. Then there's going to be more details and more details and more details. And if we stay with it, just like you're studying a topic, you stay with it, keep trying to understand, stay with it. Eventually you'll understand.
Thank you, Maharaj. So here we are reading that the senses, the cause of the conditioned soul's material body and senses is material nature. So what is the cause of desire according to Sankhya philosophy, Maharaj?
The mind. The cause of the desire is the soul, and the soul is distracted or distorted by the influence of the material nature. Therefore, the soul will think he desires something that he doesn't actually desire. It's like advertisement. There's a whole science of how to convince somebody that they need something that they don't need, or they don't want, or want something that they don't really want. So the material energy convinces the soul, and then the soul's interaction with the material energy makes it even more complicated. And the modes of nature, the complexity of the modes of nature causes the soul to think in a different way. But the original desire of the soul to know or to enjoy or to want to stay alive or all these things, the self-preservation principle, that comes from the soul. Originally, the desire comes from the soul. It has to come from the soul because the mental energy is not inert; it's inert. You're still thinking you're the body, or you're thinking you're the mind. But we're not the mind. We're not the body. We're the soul, and the soul, the desire comes from the soul. The original desire is to serve Krishna. That's the soul's desire. But when it comes in contact with material energy, and now we're going to read how that happens in detail, then the soul thinks that he desires something else. He thinks that he wants something else by the distortion of contaminated consciousness, false ego, in the mind, the intelligence, the senses, the sense objects. And all of those things combined together bewilders the soul and causes him to forget his original desire. So the material desire is a distortion of the spiritual desire of the soul. And until the soul stops identifying with that distortion, then he will think that he wants something other than Krishna consciousness or other than Krishna. He'll think he needs something other than Krishna. Okay? Okay, 8:30, Hare Krishna. We got an active group, fantastic, advanced devotees in choir like this. Thank you so much. Thank you all of you for tuning in. Thanks for, thanks for everyone. All glories to Devahuti. All glory to Devahuti's questions. All glories to Kapila Dev. Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai. Gaur Premanandi. Hari Hari Bol. Thank you very much and see you tomorrow night. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.